Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, it gives me great pleasure to welcome you to this Friday evening lecture by Ambassador Fahmy. I actually warned him. I said, when you come in, there'll be nobody in the room. I didn't expect to see such a full house. It shows how famous you are, Nabil. And as you all know, whenever I speak here, I make 3 points. And what I want to do is explain to you why you are truly privileged today to listen to this lecture. And the first reason is that we're discussing what I think is in many ways the most important region of the world. Because if you look carefully around the world, and let's say, for example, if you had a conflict or tension, a new war between UK and Argentina over Falklands, nobody would care, right? It would have no impact on the world whatsoever. But believe me, if you have any kind of tension or conflict in the Middle East, it creates ripples in every corner of the world. And that's why it's actually very important to understand what's happening in the region. And frankly, the region has always been very exciting, but I think not as exciting as the last 12 months. It's quite amazing how much has changed in that region. And the second reason why you're privileged is that, to understand that region well, you really got to understand the field of diplomacy very well. And I can say, as someone who served in diplomacy for 33 years, almost as long as you, right? That it is amazingly, it is the second oldest profession in the world. But no relationship to the oldest profession. But as I explained in an essay, this is marketing. I'm marketing the current issue of globalization. I hope you read it. My opening essay is on diplomacy. And the question I asked is diplomacy a sunrise or sunset profession? And my answer is that it is a sunrise profession. And it is a sunrise profession because the issues that diplomats have to deal with are becoming more complicated, more difficult to handle. And therefore, you need better and better diplomats. And I can tell you, as someone who's been in that profession, it's harder to find a better diplomat than Fahmy, who's going to address us today. And this brings me to my third point, to describe briefly his career, because I can go 1 hour about his career. He started off in the foreign ministry, served as ambassador to Japan, and before that, political advisor to Egypt's foreign minister. He's held several posts in the Egyptian government, but he really, I think, if I may be fair, made his mark when he served as ambassador to the United States in a very critical period from 1999 to 2008. And I can tell you, I was recently in Bellagio. Bellagio, by the way, is a beautiful place in Italy. And he and I were attending a conference together on the future of global public policy education. And I had many wonderful walks in Bellagio with him. And I learned so much about what was really going on behind the scenes in Washington, D.C., in the build-up to the Iraq War, in the developments after that. So believe me, this man is amazing in terms of his repository of knowledge. So you're truly privileged today to hear from him. And Nabil promised to be both frank and speak for 30 minutes. And then I hope you're ready with some difficult and challenging questions, because he'll give you wonderful answers. So Nabil, over to you.
Truly honored to be here, and let me start by telling you 2 quick stories. First of all, one of the reasons why it's always great to come to events or to listen to Kishore when he's speaking is he always has an extremely insightful and unique way to introduce things, both lightly and importantly at the same time. And his example of the role of diplomacy, frankly, is one. It is, and I agree with him, it is an extremely important profession. But there are light sides of it as well. The other, of course, is when he's introducing you, he sort of goes way overboard, and you start enjoying the introduction and forget what you're going to say yourself. And I remember my wife, although it wasn't at a Kishore event, once said, "You smile too much when they're introducing you. Don't believe that stuff. Just get to the topic." But more seriously, like Kishore, I'm a former diplomat. Not like him, however. He was known to be the kingmaker in New York by always being there when deals had to be done and when things needed to be achieved. So I actually heard of Kishore before I met him. More recently, however, when I was offered the job of being dean or founding dean of the New School of Global Affairs at the American University in Cairo, I didn't know what a dean does, and frankly had no interest in academia because I hadn't been in academia. And Lisa Anderson, who was provost, presently president, and a common friend of ours, came to me and said, "You need to do this, blah, blah, blah." She didn't get very far. So the second round, she said, "You know, Kishore Marubeni does this." So that shows you it's important, and it's something you need to do. I started to listen. So that's really the opening into this new job. So I'm not sure whether AUC needs to thank you, but I need to thank you because I'm enjoying my present job considerably. Let me get to the point and try to stay on track in terms of time. Kishore, even at the UN, was on time, which is not the practice. But I'll try to be on time because I know everything here is very precise, and I seriously want to give you time to ask questions. Let me start by saying I'm going to give you both a professional and a personal perspective of what I think is happening in the Middle East. I say this because my original career was a government employee. I spent 35 years, actually 36 years in government, 35 of them at the Egyptian Foreign Ministry. And then I went into academia. So what I'm going to be telling you is both my practical and personal experience as a former diplomat, as an Egyptian presently. The Middle East, the Arab Middle East, and probably also Iran, but I'm talking mostly about the Arab Middle East, is going through a societal change. The reasons are obvious. The only surprise is we're surprised. Demographically, 56% of Egypt's population is 25 years and younger. If you look at it through the region, 60% are younger than 30 years of age. Young people want change. And needless to say, young people today are much better connected than young people when I was of that age. This is also a different era. Today in Egypt, and I will focus on Egypt, but I will expand it a little bit, even before the revolution, Egyptians had access to a multitude of sources of information, be that in the media, in the internet, on television, you name it, it was there, and even in the printed local press. It wasn't like when I was growing up where we had 3 papers. You actually have a tremendous access to any piece of information you want. And I remember when I was in government being challenged by young people about why we weren't reacting to the Muslim minority in China or in Russia or this event or that event. And they were doing that almost immediately. The minute it happened, we would then get a phone call, okay, why aren't you reacting to this? So information is available to them all. Add to that, that because of the nature of our former government, it went on for quite some time. So you had, and I'm going to use the word regime, because the president had been there for 30 years, but it's not only the president, it's also the system, which actually goes back to 60 years, starting with the revolution in 1952. So the system itself was aging. And the system was aging, and when you have an aged system, it loses its vision. It's very difficult for somebody who is of my age to come and project the vision for my granddaughter, who at 6 is already emailing me. I can't tell her her future. I can tell her a little bit of my future. So when you have a system that's been there, even if it's been successful, it comes to a point where you have to have the changeover. Or you lose, I mean, one of the basic components of leadership is you have to be a good manager. You have to choose the right policies, but then you have to show the vision of leadership at the same time. And if you don't have the vision, that's when you start, the returns start diminishing. So I think our system was getting old. Leave aside the issue that the president himself had reached 84, but it was more than the president, it was a system. Now, if everything was going well in Egypt and in the Arab world, these things would have taken more time. But packaged with these fundamental generic problems, we had a disparity between the rich and the poor. We were growing at 7% before the financial crisis, but the rich were growing much more quickly than the poor, so you had a widening gap. We had a tremendous volatility, a high level of poverty, first of all, and then you had a regional volatility in terms of the regional problems, whether it's the Arab-Israeli conflict, the Iraq, or these different issues, the whole debate about, and then you add to that, you also have the issue of the search for identity. Now, in an era of globalization, we're all searching for identity. But when you have half the population is young, then that search becomes much more acute, much more serious, and it raises many more issues. And that's frankly where the debate of religion, or are you a nationalist Egyptian in traditional sense? Does religion come into a factor here? Or are you a secular, progressive-looking, Western-oriented Egyptian of a new era? And I've heard all the debates. And all I can tell you is, when I look at myself, I'm a nationalist Egyptian, but I'm a different Egyptian from who I was when I was 25 years old, because the whole environment has changed, the challenges I faced have changed, and I will give you a specific example. When I was growing up, just entering the university, we had limitations on travel, particularly financial limitations. So I mean, the problem then was, frankly, if you didn't have recourse to travel, your experience abroad was very limited. I come from a diplomatic family, so I traveled, but most of my peers didn't have that option. Today, whether you're traveling or not, you're virtually traveling because you're on the internet, you're doing this, satellite television. So the comparisons that the average Egyptian had was not with the person next door. I mean, they were actually comparing themselves to the person next door, to the person in East Asia, or in Western Europe, in the States, or in South Africa, and tended to look at the positive comparisons, not the negative comparisons. And that's what they held their government accountable for. Why am I not as good as X in country so and X in country so-and-so? And of course, all these issues put pressures on local governments and regimes. And when you had aging systems, they didn't respond well to these pressures. If you add to that, and I'll be very, very frank, we developed significantly, I believe, even before the revolution. We developed well in terms of freedom of expression. You could basically say almost anything you wanted in Egypt and have it printed, and nobody would bother to find out what you're doing or why. And I say almost everything, but it was actually much better than people actually thought. But you didn't have, I mean, as you could see the alternatives, and as you could say almost anything you wanted, you never got closer to sharing in decision-making. Decision-making remained either among a political elite or among a political elite and their supporters. So you actually became more energized, but more frustrated at the same time. And this is where the change effect, the positive opening effect, and the bad governance effect clashed. If you're going to have bad governance, you better not have freedom of expression. You better not give people alternatives, because it just gives them more opportunities. So that's really what happened here. And the only thing that is surprising with what happened in the Arab world is how it happened so quickly, particularly in Tunis and Egypt. For it to happen in Egypt in 18 days is quite astonishing. Now, we were heading towards a crisis. There was no doubt in my mind that we would have a crisis sometime in 2011, because we were having elections for parliament and president in September and October. But nobody thought we'd have a revolution, not even the revolutionaries. Now, and what you saw here was a youth-led, but not a youth-only revolution. It was led by the youth leaders, but the silent majority immediately started to support them. And that reflected a general lack of anxiety and anger throughout society, which surprised even the strong central security system which existed in Egypt at the time. Now, post the revolution, what you have now in Egypt is a community on steroids. Everybody's demonstrating. Everybody's challenging authority. You can't have an argument without demonstration. I mean, I just came from the university, and we've had a whole week of demonstrations. Now, we solved them, and I hope against the president and everybody else. But I mean, you know, and they always lead up to change the president. So that even if it's about a minor thing. So anyway, that's where Egypt is, and that's not bad, frankly. After so many years of not expressing yourselves, having a participation, I think, is a good direction. But we're going to have to deal with problems and challenges of political transformation. How to put together a system where rich, poor, Islamists, secularists, conservative, leftists all find place in the decision-making process, at the same time as we develop the economy, which of course is a problem, because when you're doing this transformation, it leads to a sense of anxiety and insecurity, which slows down domestic and international investment. And also, when you have it in so many parts of the same region, it slows down tourism considerably as well, which is a very important factor for us. So it's a challenging factor. You have demonstrations wanting more salaries, but more politics. And you can't provide more salaries without more revenues, unless you want to tax them to death. And you can't get more revenues unless you have more investment. So it's really a challenging situation. Now, where are we going in Egypt? And I will try not to go too far, because I did promise to give you at least half an hour for questions. You have basically, in my mind, three fundamental forces, political forces in Egypt. One is the ideologues. And under the ideologues, I put the Islamists, the socialists, anybody who is committed to a belief and doesn't want to rationally think beyond the belief. That's his belief, and I respect it. But that's what we're not going to be able to convince them not to be ideologues. Nevertheless, they have a right to be part of the system. They, for me, are one trend. The other trend are the liberal, Western-oriented constituency in society. They look at democracy in the eyes, or in the Western model. This is what we would like. And in the middle, you have the silent majority, which has not participated for the last 60 years in politics. They actually don't know what to do. And the competition is really about them. It's not about the Western secularists, because they will vote for liberal candidates and for Western values. And it's not about the ideologues, because they will vote according to their beliefs. It's how do you get that middle, the big chunk in the middle. Now, our elections before the revolution, even in the most optimistic, fudged figures never went beyond 30% participation. And I can tell you, in reality, it was probably single digits. Now, the last referendum we had just 2 months ago after the revolution, to our surprise and amazement, went up from single digits to 44% participation. So the Egyptian people were going out and participating because they wanted to have a say in what they're doing. With these three tranches that we have, I actually believe that if we can get voter participation up to about 60%, somewhere between 55 and 65%, in our elections for parliament and president, you will have a result in parliament that is truly reflective of Egyptian society. And what I mean by this is a cosmopolitan society which includes Islamists, rightists, leftists, but a huge chunk in the middle. I'm not one of the demonstrators. I support the revolution, but I was not one of the demonstrators. But I went and sat in Tahrir Square every day to watch the people, to see what was happening. And you could see that this was all of Egypt. Rich, poor, veiled, unveiled, everybody was there. If you can get that kind of participation, then frankly, developments in Egypt will lead to a more modern, more progressive, more centrist, and more moderate Middle East than you have now. If, on the other hand, things don't go well in Egypt, then what I think you're going to have is, first of all, a delayed progression of democracies in the Middle East, in the Arab Middle East. You probably will have more violence on both sides. If we fail, those opposing openness and democracy will use more force and be more self-confident about using force. And the resistance to that will lead also to more force. While if we succeed, frankly, the winds of change in the Middle East will not stop anywhere in the region. I don't mean by that what's happening in Egypt will happen exactly the same way in Morocco or in Saudi Arabia or in Syria. Each country has its own uniqueness, but they cannot resist change. What I'm saying is that they will all move towards a positive direction. If we move, they will all move, many will move negatively, not all, if we fail. And the reason I say this, again, we not only are in the center of the region, but we're a quarter, 84 million Egyptians. There are 84 million Egyptians out of 320 million in the region. And if you sort of factor that into culture, economics, politics, that frankly has an effect throughout the region. Now, two factors which I need to take into account, I'd like you to take into account as we look into this. One are domestic issues. As I said, we have to face the challenge of reforming politics, liberalizing things, allowing people on steroids to even express themselves even more strongly, but also give them concrete, real results in the meantime. Otherwise, they will vote strongly in anger against what they're facing. That's our domestic challenge. And we're going to do that by having an election for parliament in November, end of November, beginning of December, trying to develop a constitutional assembly and a constitution in the next couple of months, and holding an election for president sometime in spring. You can question the sequence of that, but I'm just giving you the facts, and we can discuss the sequence later. But that's what we will be trying to do. Now, everybody is dealing with politics now in Egypt, and everybody's trying to factor it for to their service, and that's the state of play. The military, which is now playing the role of the president until we elect one, is in a unique situation where they were asked to do this, and they keep saying, we want to leave, but nobody believes them. Now, I don't think it's fair not to believe them, because they did not start this revolution. This was a people's revolution. It was not like the '52 revolution caused by the military. The military reacted to it. It wasn't the opposite way around. Secondly, because I know so many of them, I see how they're agonizing when, I mean, you know the saying of putting two economists in the room, you get three opinions. We'll try to put two politicians in the room, you'll get 50 opinions. So they invite civilian experts to come in, they get different opinions, and they go out and say, well, you guys never agree. Well, that's part of being a democracy. You have to listen to all this and find a solution. So anyway, they want to go back to the barracks. Do they want to preserve certain interests and certain rights? I suppose they do. But I still believe that they understand this is a changed Egypt. And they will have to change themselves also as we move forward. And I've mentioned repeatedly yesterday and today that if you look at the way they're reacting to the public, I mean, in essence, in the past, the military wouldn't bother with public reaction. Today, they're following the Facebook activities and the Twitter activity to see when the next demonstration is going to be and on what topic, and to see whether it's serious or not, and because they don't want more demonstrations. So if you even look at that, whether they admit it or not, this is a new military that knows the limitations of its own power, because they can't act the same way they acted before. The other point, which is foreign or regional rather than local, as we do all of this, we have to, as Egypt and the Middle East, the Arab Middle East, deal with what's happening around us. So we're under pressure, for example, when it happened in Libya. How do we deal with the Libyan situation as a government? And we were between a rock and a hard place. We have 1.5 million Egyptians in Libya. So do we support the revolution in Libya at the expense of risking some of our own nationals, or do we not support it at the expense of our principles? It's a problem that we had to face. The same thing applies to Syria. What position should we take in terms of Syria? We're now a revolution based on freedom and principles of freedom and liberty. Well, should we support the same things in other countries without promoting a policy which we don't support of regime change? That's not our role. Regime change has to happen from within. And finally, well, in a democratic state, you can't tell your people to be quiet. Well, you can, but they won't listen. So what happens when you have confrontation between Palestinians and Israelis so close to our border? Or when you have Egyptian soldiers killed on the border? Or if you have a conflict in Lebanon, for example, with Israel? Or, and I will be very blunt, when you get an American veto in the Security Council on an application for Palestine membership. It won't be as easy for the present government and governments to say, well, let's look at the long haul here. Let's look at the strategic objective and not the tactical objective. Leadership in democratic systems is more difficult, and it has to couple the immediate tactical short-term sensitivities of their constituencies with the long-term strategic interests of their nation. And we're going to be facing that challenge. To face that challenge in normal circumstances is difficult. And I say this if you look at situations like in America, for example, where they're having elections over and over again, and where they have to, at the same time, take into account the strategic interest, it's a challenge in itself. Well, to do that in the middle of a revolution, I mean, we are in a revolutionary state. We haven't yet finished the revolution. So to try to do all that in the middle of all this is quite a challenge. I will close by saying, I think Egypt has changed fundamentally in the last 6 months. I think one of the reasons for that reason and for some other reasons, the Arab Middle East has changed fundamentally. How much we succeed and how soon is the question. It's not whether we will change. We have changed and we will continue to change. It's where we go with this change. And what is the cost? Do we stumble on the way? Do we have violence on the way? Do we have to sacrifice one sector of our community versus the other? Again, one simple example, the social equity debate. how far do you go in promoting a market economy, or how far do you go in promoting market social equity at the expense of a market economy? It's a debate we're having. The debate about the role of religion in society and having a secular society. That's the debate we're having, and we're going to have to reach these compromises. They're serious compromises, and I think there will be prices and costs to be paid and compromises made. As I said, having sat in Tahrir Square almost on a daily basis, having listened to the youth movements repeatedly, I'm quite confident, and having listened to the middle class, the silent middle class since then, I'm quite confident that we will succeed. Being a cynic by nature, I am sure we will make some mistakes and we will stumble on the way getting there. So I'm less confident, less sure about what the price will be in getting there. I'm not sure about the time frame. I mean, the military commission has said they will leave within 6 months. I don't often disagree with the military, but I've told them openly, there's no way you're leaving in 6 months because we won't be finished in 6 months. We won't be finished before next summer, even in the best case scenarios, even though they're talking about January, February. But believe me, if I come back before next summer, we'll still be discussing this issue. What I'm worried about is simply being able to turn the economy around and start it up again as we have this political debate, because we have a serious unemployment problem, and people need to get back and be employed in order to get rational thinking to rise to the occasion. Thank you all for your time. I'm happy to answer any questions, even among issues that I didn't mention. I just have been looking at my watch because, as I said, Kishore was always an on-time diplomat, and I didn't want to go beyond my 30 minutes as an introduction. Thank you very much.
Let me ask the first question. Yesterday, I think I read a column, editorial in either IHT or Financial Times, which was very critical of Erdogan's visit to Egypt and saying why is he stoking the flames there. But when you and I discussed it last night at the dinner where Mr. Lee Kuan Yew was present, you mentioned that Mr. Erdogan said that he actually wants Egyptian democracy to succeed, because if Egyptian democracy succeeds, democracy will succeed in the Arab world. And if democracy succeeds in the Arab world, it'd be good for Turkey, because Turkey needs stability around its borders. So what's your take on the Erdogan visit, positive or negative?
My take was very, very positive. Those who were concerned about the Erdogan visit were mostly foreigners looking at what he said on the Palestinian-Israeli issue. His criticism of Israel was quite vocal and quite clear. And needless to say, we have been having problems because of the 5 Egyptians killed on the border with Israel. So he played with that. He didn't play with it, but his focus on Israel being a truant state or being pampered in the region was resonating throughout.
He said spoiled child of the
spoiled
West.
child, exactly. That's the term he used. Now, however, in terms of the transformation of Egypt, he spoke like a statesman. He really did. What Ambassador Fahmy is mentioning is an example. He said that it's more important for me that you succeed now than Turkey, because we've already succeeded and we will continue to move forward. But to move forward, for Turkey to move even further, we need our region to be stable and prosperous. So we need you to succeed. And he took on the Islamists, which was very interesting. He took on the Islamists in Egypt. And he said, in Turkey, Turkey is a secular state. I'm not secular. I'm Islamist, but the state is secular. And secular means they're equidistant from Muslims, Christians, and non-believers. So I have my own beliefs, and I don't blame my religion for my mistakes in politics. They're my mistakes in politics. My religion is an issue of faith. So you have to find this definition where the state is for everybody. Your faith is for yourself. And he was criticized very strongly by Islamists in Egypt for that. But I found his positions to be actually that of a statesman. The little bit of sensitivity of him trying to fill in the vacuum and play a role for his own country, well, I would do the same. I don't see anything wrong with that, frankly.
Okay, questions. You can press the mic in front of you. Yeah, right there. You press the mic and then identify yourself. Oh, you can use this one.
Sure. Winston Mock, I own media school here. What do you see now as the agenda of the Muslim Brotherhood? Do you think they realistically evolve to what Turkey is like, a Islamic party in a secular state, or they try to be around over time?
Okay, well, that's an excellent question. And that also allows me to go back to Erdogan. Erdogan was asked about this, and he said, my party is not an Islamic party. My party is not an Islamist party. My party is a social party. I am Muslim. I believe in Islam and in Islamic tradition. The party is open for everybody. But let me answer your question directly. I don't think the Muslim Brotherhood knows exactly what it wants, because we tend to generalize. The Muslim Brotherhood youth movements joined the revolution at the very beginning, even though the adults rejected and refused that. And they've been debating among themselves what positions to take. So I think the Muslim Brotherhood per se isn't united. Do they have common elements? Sure. They want to put a Islamist brand on political theory, political concepts, the norms and laws of the country. But how far do they want to push this? Do they want to enforce it on banking, on tourism, on this and that? It's debatable, because if you talk to different members, they will tell you, well, that's not actually a part of Islam. There's no religious state in Islam. For one example, if there's no religious state in Islam, it doesn't exist. These are theories that have been made up by people. So to give you a precise answer, one, there is no clear definition of what exactly they want. Every time you give them a microphone, they make mistakes, and they lose support in the public. Every time you keep the microphone away and you let them work in society to help the communities, they gain support. But that being said, they will definitely try to push what are considered to be contemporary Islamist theories. So it's not going to be, I don't see them changing our foreign policy, except maybe a little bit of better relations with countries that have an Islamic tradition, but they were not going to boycott America or Israel or this or that. I don't see them changing our economy. There's actually no socialism in Islam, by the way. The idea that Islam is a socialist economic theory is completely nonsense. There's no socialism in Islam. So I don't see them moving away from a market economy. But yes, they will probably be more aggressive in rejecting Western liberal traditions as are known today. And I oppose that. I think one has to allow society to make up its own mind without trying to force it on society by law.
Next question.
The Middle East has been known to be the center. My name is Roslan. I'm from the Ministry of Home Affairs. The Middle East is known to be the center of global Islam. Your universities and universities like Azhar in Egypt are the disseminators of Islam as such, right? I was just wondering, this new balance that you mentioned that the Egyptian society is going to have, your cosmopolitan society, people on the left, right, and in the center. How do you think that's going to impact a university like Azhar? Can I have your comments on the brand of Islam that you think will be disseminated from a place like Azhar? Thank you.
Sure. I'm going to be a bit provocative here.
Please, even more provocative.
Yeah, I actually think Al-Azhar suffered from a non-democratic Egypt and would gain from a democratic Egypt. Having Al-Azhar more independent from the government actually allows free thinkers in Al-Azhar to think about the religion, to go through the ijtihad process. What do we really mean? How does it apply now? And so on and so forth, while trying to have it as a religious government organ, a quasi-religious government organ. You end up limiting its actual value and its credibility vis-a-vis
other movements. I don't think you can counter Islamic extremism by government public policy. It has to be countered by the correct public policy, but by an alternative religious voice that is also credible. So I actually think that whether it's Azhar University or otherwise, they will gain from this openness. They probably will stumble on some issues on the way, but they will gain. And they have already shown leadership. We've been having a problem with how to develop the next constitution and whether we could put together before the parliament a set of fundamental principles that should be enshrined in the constitution. Nobody was able to do it. Al-Azhar wrote them up. And there was a consensus around these provisions that the future constitution should include these basic parameters and not violate them. So I actually think that this is good for Al-Azhar and it's good for Egypt, and they would be promoting a much more moderate, centrist tradition of Islam, which is their tradition as Al-Azhar.
Oh, please.
I'm from the Nanyang Technological University. In your voice and some of the things that you're saying, I get a sense that what you're reflecting the first flush of freedom that your countrymen are currently enjoying. But the road to democracy, as you would know, is not easy. And I was wondering that given the very many different opinions that you have and the kind of players that you have in Egyptian politics, to have a parliamentary system come into being after your first elections, do you countenance a possibility that this might lead to a gridlock government and over time people could get disillusioned? And perhaps at this stage would be a time to open the debate for retaining the powerful presidency that can deliver some degree of direction to the country. As you would know, over time, this would disappear and people would want jobs and better governance and so on. So they would forget about the revolution. Well, I'm just asking your opinion on this.
No, that's excellent.
And can I add to that? Can our mutual friend Amri Musa become the next president?
Sure. Those are both excellent questions. After the revolution, during the revolution, a group of independent thinkers, if you want, for lack of a better term, who ended up being called wise men, although we weren't only men and we weren't all that wise, suggested that the president hand over power to the vice president and remain as a titular president until September, as a sort of a compromise way to move this forward. And since then, we've been engaging in discussions about the sequence of institution building and the content, including a parliamentary system or a presidential system. Our proposal was postpone elections, have a debate, public debate about what kind of state we want to establish, elect a constitutional assembly, then elect the president, and then the parliament. That was rejected. So what we ended up with is an election for parliament in November. They will then establish a committee to develop the constitution and elect the president. And among the discussions we're having, and this is where Amr Musa comes in, and Hamid al-Baradei and 10 others at least, well, they're all candidates for president, but what kind of president? Are you a titular president or an executive president? They don't know. In actual fact, we don't even know what kind of parliament we're going to have. But revolutions aren't always very rational, so this is what we could get so far. What I expect to happen, let me also add to your question. We have 34 parties now, and we haven't finished. So this looks like a gridlock. And it's not something that I'm comfortable with. The inclination still is to have a strong president rather than a parliamentary system. As a cynical political or policy person, I'm more inclined in that direction. But as somebody coming out of a revolution, I'm actually more inclined to a parliamentary system. It just is, how can we move? And I'm not sure if we move with a strong president, we'll be able to move back to a parliamentary system in the future. my long answer to you, we're discussing all of that. We haven't decided. All of these discussions are coming up, and we're debating it. Over the next few months, we will decide how to do it. I would not rule out at all that we might have an election for parliament in November, and then another one within a year. Again, I mean, if we ultimately decide to change the system fundamentally, then a lot of the members of parliament, and its establishment, for example, 50% of parliament has to be farmers and laborers. If we change that, then you have to change parliament again. So I wouldn't rule out us having yet another election. But the question is valid. What kind of state are we trying to build? Egyptians haven't decided yet, so I can't give you the answer. On Amr Moussa, we have at least 10 candidates for president. 3 of them from the Egyptian Foreign Ministry. 2, at least 3 that I know. I don't. There may be others. 2 are serious.
3 from the Foreign Ministry.
3 former Foreign Ministry officials. Yeah. You know, you let these people go abroad and they go crazy. But the most well known. Is this webcast? I'm getting serious here. The most well known is Amr Moussa, the former Secretary General, and Mohammed Baradei, who is the Nobel Prize laureate. And there are others that I actually find extremely interesting myself. I'm personally associated with the first 2, but there are some other good candidates. What I see missing, frankly, is not their experience. Their experience we can see from their CVs. It's not whether they're good managers or not. We can see that also from what they've done. It's their vision for Egypt. Where do you want to take this country? Amr Moussa is a wonderful, passionate nationalist. And he has said, I will only run for 1 term. He said, I'm 76. All I can give you is a transition into the future. I can't give you a full-fledged projection into the future. That's his projection. The criticism for Moussa has been, well, you've been so close to the regime in the past, so are you really new? Well, that's partially true, partially wrong. President Mubarak was around for 30 years, so anybody who's 40 and over must have worked somewhere or the other with the regime, and that applies to everybody, not only ministers. And Moussa was his foreign minister for 10 years, but he had also left into the Arab League. So the judgment will have to be to the people in that respect. His real problem is, will his age or his past history weigh heavier than his popularity? He is very popular in the street with the average person. Mohammed Baradei, for example, who has tremendous integrity, has tremendous support among intellectuals and the youth movements, is so sophisticated and intellectual as a presenter that he doesn't always relate to the average person in the street. So we have to be careful here, because in the voting box, it's not whose vote you get, it's how many votes you get. And I know I'm being a bit long here, but it's an interesting topic. It's also about who develops the better political machine. And I'll give you a quick story. We had a referendum 2 months ago about changing the Constitution. And I was among those who opposed amending the old Constitution because it meant revising it again. Amr Moussa was against it, Mohammed Baradei was against it, everybody I knew was against it. The vote went 77% for and 23% against it. And the reason was, we went around talking about constitutional politics and constitutional law, and that was way above the debate level of the average person. While those who supported the change went to the average person and said, you want the military back in the barracks? Vote yes and we move on. You want the economy to start again? Vote yes and we move on. You want elections to happen? Vote yes and we move on. They were able to do the convincing argument. Simply. And so these are all reasonably, well, most, not all. Most of them are reasonably good candidates. Who will win has all the positive and negative issues, but also who develops the right political machine, and we've never done this before, so it's going to be an exercise.
Okay, after you, the Indian High Commissioner.
Thank you. So, first of all, as a Cypriot, I can't resist a small comment on
Erdogan.
Mr. Erdogan calling Israel the spoilt child of the region. It's a case of the kettle calling the pot black. But now my more serious question, and that is, do you feel that the Arab Spring makes it more or less likely that we will see a resolution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and why?
Sure.
Either yes or no.
Yes, because there's going to be a lot of tough love in the process. I actually believe...
You think the answer is yes?
My answer is yes.
Huh.
I think the problem with the last 25 years or so is with Egypt, once Egypt signed a peace agreement, there was a determination that there's not going to be any more war because you can't have a war without Egypt. And at the same time, the Arabs were divided because they were lost without Egypt's guidance. So what you had here was, if you define power in not only military but also political and economic sense, you had on the Arab side a diminishing level of power, while on the Israeli side they remained constant, if not even growing. I still believe today that if you did a poll throughout the Arab world, the majority would support Arab-Israeli peace. Arab-Israeli peace.
Yeah.
The majority would oppose having a war with Israel. I sincerely believe this without any exaggeration. But frankly, the Israelis, because, there was a wonderful Time magazine cover story about 6 months ago, which I read on a plane. The front page was why Israel doesn't want peace. And it was a very positive article. It wasn't critical. But they simply said the Israeli economy is growing. The GDP is $15,000 or something of the sort. There's no real threat. There's no insecurity. Even terrorism is down. Why should they take the risk and compromise? I actually think with democracies in the Middle East, they won't be at risk of war. And I would not promote a war between Arabs and Israelis. But I do think that they will realize that governments in the Middle East can't ignore their own constituencies, and therefore they need to be more rational in responding. And this point was actually made by Ehud Olmert yesterday in an article, that we have to deal with it differently. So because of that, I think it will be a positive. It won't happen immediately, but I think it'll be a positive.
The High Commissioner? Yeah. And then we get a student from the school.
You spoke about the domestic political spectrum with the silent majority in between and the Western liberal at one end and the ideologues at the other. Now, one model of change in the Middle East in the last 10 years, and certainly it's continuing, has been the Iraq model or the Libya model. The Libyan model is still something we are in the midst of. What implications does this have on the political spectrum in terms of the relative weights of the extremes or of the middle itself?
Great question. The Iraq model, for us, even if it succeeds, is a nightmare, because it focuses on Shiite, Sunni, quotas, and all that. And that's a formula which, as nation states that don't have these problems, is quite problematic for us. We look at the traditional concept of the state. So we would not like to see the Arab Gulf, for example, be reweighted on a quota system. We would like them all to be more inclusive, more democratic, yes, but not get into who's Shiite, who's Sunni, rather than who's Bahraini and who's Qatari and who's Saudi. You can't ignore who's Shiite and who's Sunni, but if you start dividing on that basis, you go back to before World War II and before you had European colonialism and see where the tribes were and where they weren't. And it's an endless problem. It also adds the religious dimension to politics, which for people like me is a reality, but an annoying reality. I much prefer, very frequently when I was still a diplomat, well, I'll tell the story precisely. I remember speaking once to Dennis Ross on the peace process.
Dennis Ross, yeah.
Dennis Ross was a special envoy for America on the Arab-Israeli peace process. And I said, Dennis, when you start negotiating, this was before the Palestinian-Israeli Camp David, when you discuss this with the Israelis and Palestinians, you're going to fail at Camp David because the preparation is not there. But when you fail, don't announce failure. We still have some time to work, so don't announce failure. We'll help you. And don't announce failure based on something religious. He said, what do you mean? Why should we fail? I said, anyway, the reasons why it shouldn't be religious is it's difficult enough negotiating with human beings. I can't negotiate with God. And frankly, this is why, as I said, I'm not going to try to change positions of ideologues. I will respect their rights to express themselves and to take their positions. I will try to counterbalance it with other positions. That's why I'm also not comfortable with the Iraqi example. If they succeed, I will applaud them. But I wouldn't take it as a model where you have to destroy the whole country from abroad and then divide it up. And it's not yet. I mean, if you're talking about a revolution not being complete, it's not complete in Iraq either. Libya is even earlier, too early to determine. But
where's Gaddafi, by the way?
well, if NATO doesn't know, I'm not sure we know. But you know, he's turned out to be much smarter than people think. But anyway, again, look, Libya used to be, for us as Egyptians, the buffer against extremism, our Western buffer against extremism. Even if we didn't agree with everything Gaddafi was doing, and believe me, there were differences, but he was a buffer against extremism. We would truly be anxious if we felt that this opened the door for extremism on our Western border. It's too early to say, however. I don't know what the package is. That being said, Libya is what, 15 million at most?
Less.
What's 15 then? Anyway, we're 84. So I don't expect the Libyan story to have ripples throughout the Middle East. Tunis was the spark. Whether democracy is sustainable, it will be about Egypt much more than Libya.
Please, we're going to get one of our students now.
Sure.
Please introduce yourself to him, sir.
My name's Yael Amit. I'm an MPA student here. I was wondering if you could comment about the future of the Egyptian-Israeli peace treaty and whether the mob storming of the Israeli embassy about 2 weeks ago now is any indication of where we're heading in the post-Mubarak world.
Sure. First of all, as I said, I actually think that the majority of Arabs are supportive of Arab-Israeli peace. And if I take that to Egyptians, I think the majority of Egyptians, even those who do not like the agreement, would not want to revoke it. They probably want to revise the annex, the security annex to the agreement. But I can tell you, even the Israelis will ask to revise that because it's simply outdated in terms of security for both sides. But because of the issue of the mob, it's an extremely important example of mishandling on both sides. There was an incident on the border, as you know, and there were Egyptian casualties on that. If you're in a democratic system, and especially in the middle of a revolution, you better explain what happened to the people. Because, as I said at the beginning, they are all on steroids. You just give them an issue, and they're out there on the street. Well, first the Israelis expressed regret in different forms, although at one point I think Defense Minister Barak said, well, I didn't actually apologize. I simply expressed regret, but let's just leave that aside. The investigation on the Israeli side has been going on for quite some time. Equally wrong has been the Egyptian response, frankly. And it shows you that they haven't yet shifted from pre-revolution to post-revolution. People are on the street, guys. You need to tell them what's happening. Issue a statement saying, 4 were killed, we're investigating, we'll be in touch with our Israeli counterparts, and we will fill you in as things come up. They didn't say that. They said there was an incident, and we want an investigation from the Israeli side. It went on for a couple of weeks, and then the demonstrators said, we're going to go to the Israeli embassy, date certain. They went there, nothing had happened except a wall being built. Well, a wall had been built around the Israeli embassy. Well, if you have demonstrators who are angry about something and your own government hasn't responded to it, the Israelis haven't responded to it, You give them a wall to tear down, and your military has said we will not use force against demonstrators. What do you think they're going to do? They tore down the wall. And that's exactly what happened. To the credit of the Egyptian government actually went up into the embassy, brought down the Israeli security forces, secured them all the way to the airport, and they went back to Israel. So the politics of this was mishandled. The commitment to peace on both sides is still there. But we need to get the politics, because Egyptians and Israelis cannot deal with their problems the same way they dealt with them in the past. But I truly believe that this will help the peace process, that the majority still want peace. And I say this, even if I may, on the Israeli side. From the Israelis I know, the majority I talk to want peace. They may not think it's possible, but they want peace. And I think that's where it is on the Arab side. However, if we continue to act as if this was pre-revolution, there will be consequences, because it's a different environment. But I don't think it is where this worst-case scenario where it's either peace or war. There's a lot between peace and war, and that's really where we are.
Okay, I see two questions there. Please go ahead. Is there a microphone? Okay, we'll take both of you together because you're running out of time. Ladies first and gentlemen.
Together, all right.
Yeah, yeah.
It's yours. Sure. Go ahead.
Hi, thank you, Ambassador. I'm Mitfa. I'm an MPP student at LKY. Recently, the Palestinian president has said that the Arab Spring has inspired the resolution that they're going to present sometime today at the UN. How far do you think that the Palestinian resolve to have a new state or have a state of their own has been inspired by the Arab Spring, or are they just using the Arab Spring as an excuse?
Okay, and please, you can carry on. Yes, again, identify yourself, please, Phil.
Elias Felfoul, I'm from Canada, MPP student, Tunisia, Canada. Yeah. Okay, now that we are entering this new phase, what can we learn from a country as Singapore? I want to know your point of view. I'm learning here, but I want to have your generation point of view. What can we learn as Arab from Singapore experience? And at the same time, how can we switch or add our population from European influence to Asian influence, specifically in economic questions? Thank you.
I thought you wanted to reform Canada, not Tunisia.
Okay. On the issue of the Arab Spring, I think, again, I can't interpret it for the Palestinians, but I think what he meant was Palestinians know they have a right for freedom and a state, and that's from some while now, that their confidence in going to the UN to say, okay, now we want to be recognized formally, or at least as a member, a non-state member of the UN, comes from the changing face of the Arab world. I mean, let me give you a personal story very quickly. When I was my 9 years in Washington, we were going through a difficult phase in the reform process, and particularly post 9/11. Post 9/11, being a Muslim in America was a challenge. Now, being a Muslim Arab was a double challenge. But I was proud of being a Muslim Arab, and the Americans had been attacked. They didn't do the attack, they were attacked. So it was my job to go around and explain it. And I was always received with polite anxiety.
Where? By whom?
By the audience. I mean, the audience always was, okay, we'll listen to this guy, but they're always worried about, at least particularly the first couple of years. I went to Vienna, Austria 3 weeks after the revolution. 3 weeks after the revolution, to speak at a nuclear disarmament conference. In my spare time, I like to dwell on that. I went into a meeting that had 150 experts on nuclear disarmament in Vienna. And the minute I walked in, the French delegate put up her hand and said, let's stop the conference. And the chair said, why? He said, well, how can we discuss nuclear disarmament with him in the room?
How can we discuss what?
Nuclear disarmament.
Really?
And these are experts, all of whom I know. And she said, how can we discuss nuclear disarmament with Nabil in the room? And the chair said, well, he's always been a member of this group. And she said, that's not the point. We can postpone nuclear disarmament. It's 60 years late. Let him talk about Egypt. Explain to us what's happening in Egypt. That's more important. And they literally stopped the conference for half of the morning. So I could explain to them what was happening in Egypt, and they could ask questions about that. And they were doing it with tremendous admiration. It wasn't, this was a critical audience. It shows you the face of the Arab world, frankly, even just with the beginning of the revolutions, has changed in the eyes of foreigners. Now, if we succeed, it will elevate Arab rights and recognition. If we fail, it would be, of course, a problem. So that's what I think the Palestinians meant by we're now going to the UN in light of the Arab Spring, because we're now more respectable, if you want, in your eyes at least, rather than in the past. In terms of the Singapore experience, again, I've been talking to the ambassador here about cooperating with his school and with Singapore. I can't claim to know that much about the experience to already say what is good and what's bad of it. And therefore I go to the experts for advice. But seriously speaking, what we know, what the world knows about it, is its model, it's a tremendously successful model for management. How they've succeeded over the last 30 years in developing their economy and the public service, in creating employment opportunities. You mentioned the economy in particular. If you look simply at the figures of where Singapore's economy was and its per capita income 30 years ago and where it is now, it's almost a miracle. And this is all without any real natural resources except for human beings. So I think the first lesson I would draw is invest in your people and put together the right management systems. Now, if you also have natural resources, then you have an added advantage. I can't, and I say this, I don't say this lightly, and I don't say this for my own personal interest. We actually have the only public policy school in the Middle East. And we have been going, when I first joined, it was a very, very interesting story. The school was called School of Public Affairs. Translate that into Arabic, it means nothing. What it means is general affairs in Arabic. So when I would go around and say...
Not those kinds of affairs, is it?
Well, those they'd be interested. When you said public affairs, they said, well, what do you do? What exactly do you do? So for two reasons, I changed the name to Global Affairs and Public Policy, because I was interested more in global, not only that. But seriously, we have more demand now than we can cope with. Because the minute we started to explain to people that we were interested in changing the system from within, enabling you, whether you are civil society, civil service, to be more efficient in developing policy, evaluating it, implementing it, or in promoting different policy, we immediately had students and trainees who wanted to come in. After the revolution, while I haven't seen the dollars yet, the number of people who have contacted us saying, we want to provide you with support, and I'm talking about this regionally, is truly a source of tremendous optimism. Now, again, I have to see the money. Sorry? Well, they're offering people so far. We will offer scholarships, yes. We have gotten a number of contacts, people saying, we want to give you money to train civil service, to offer scholarships for students, to do research for faculty. The money hasn't come in yet, so I like to see it before. But the interest is completely different. And I think that's what we need to learn from Singapore. More than that, I need to fall back on the expert here to tell us.
Okay, actually, you're past out of time, but can you take a few more minutes? Are you all okay for a few more minutes? Okay, let's start with the lady. 1, 2, 3, 4, and then we take the 4 questions quickly, if you don't mind. And then we'll close. Short, sharp questions, okay? We start with ladies first, and then 1, 2, 3. But if you don't mind, very short, sharp questions, and then.
Thank you, Ambassador Nabil. My question would be, what
Can
would
you identify
be
yourself?
Yeah, sorry. My name is Ranjana Rao. I'm a student of MPA here at Lee Kuan Yew. Your single biggest challenge in nation building today in terms of Egypt?
Wait. Don't answer yet. Sure. Okay. Over here, please. Can you pass the mic here? Yeah. In front, yeah. Again, identify yourself quick.
I have a question about Yemen, actually. As you know, the situation in Yemen has been going on for like 8 months now.
Okay, you have to identify yourself.
Mansoor Siraj from NUS. The first question is, what do you think hampered the revolution in Yemen? And now that Ali Abdullah Saleh is already in Yemen, what do you think is going to happen over the next 2 weeks, a month?
In Yemen.
In Yemen, yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Can you pass the mic back to at the back? Can you just pass it back? Just pass it round. There are two more questions at the back, and then we will.
Sanjay Sehgal from here. Crystal ball gazing on Syria, Iran, and Saudi Arabia. What do you think they're going to follow suit, or they're holding out?
You got 3 hours.
Hello, I am Iftikhar, PhD student at LKY.
PhD student at school, yeah.
I believe the choice you presented between war and peace is a false choice. The question is not between war and peace, but the question is peace at what cost? And you can take in any context, whether it's peace treaty or future of Israel-Egypt relations or whatever. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay.
Now you have 3 minutes to answer all these questions.
Let me start with the last one. I actually said exactly what you just said. I said it's not an issue of war and peace. There's a lot in the middle. And it's a false question to pose it as either we're going to have war with Israel or we're going to have a complete peace immediately. So we're in agreement on that issue. It's going to be a tough track and a price to pay, but there's a lot of work to do, and I think we can do that. Syria, Iran, and Saudi Arabia. Yesterday I asked a futuristic question to one of your most prominent leaders here, and his answer was, I don't have a crystal ball. So let me sort of fall back.
The question of Mr. Lee Kuan Yew yesterday.
So let me simply say, I don't have a crystal ball, but they will all change. I grant you, they will all change, and that will be in a positive sense if we succeed. And they will all change, but much more slowly, possibly at a higher cost if we fail. And it won't be one model for all. This is not going to be an Italian tailored suit that fits everybody. Yemen, what happened and what will happen? Well, I think the tribal composition of Yemen was the most complicating factor, and also how it's divided in different parts of Yemen. I was very surprised that the president went back. Extremely surprised. And
you were surprised?
I was extremely surprised. Because what that meant is that he actually feels stronger than people assumed he felt. What it meant, and I had read stuff in the Saudi press, that he would not be allowed to go back. So that now that he's going back, I think that complicates the situation, or it's an indication that he's actually stronger than the images we get on the press. That being said again, this is a matter of time, not a matter of will Yemen change. But you can't apply the same model and say, this happened in Egypt in 18 days without violence, so it's going to happen, it's a different composition. But they will change. Single biggest challenge, sure, we've broken one taboo, we haven't broken the other. The taboo which we've broken already is you can actually challenge authority. Egyptians, culturally, historically, and politically, never sort of wanted to challenge the kibir, the senior person in society. And if you take that to the office space, the political space, it's the same thing. They were always hesitant about challenging somebody of authority. I don't necessarily mean that it's either a revolution or you're silent. You can challenge them in the middle, but being able to sit there and critically challenge somebody who is your senior was something which we have broken. What we have not broken, which is the challenge that you're questioning, and which exists in the Arab world generally, and even before the revolution, we don't know how to disagree. And I've said this politically. A lot of the Arab statements will always be, there is unanimity in the Arab world. When, historically, has there actually been unanimity? And if there is, there's something wrong because we're all Arab. But a small country in the Western, in North Africa, definitely has different interests from Saudi Arabia on the other side of the Arab world. We can agree, there can be a widespread support, but unanimity? So anyway, we always announce unanimity. But if you go back to Arab historical record, except for situations like, if you want, the Egyptian-Israeli peace agreement, They never announce disagreement. They never say, well, we actually disagree. And we're going to debate our disagreements. We're going to find a way to work together. I mean, even when they disagreed with Egypt on the peace agreement, they cut off relations with Egypt, rather than disagreeing with us and arguing with us and trying to find a way to disagree. And I say this point because that's really where we are domestically. How are we going to get a compromise? In a democracy, it's not about only winning. How are you going to compromise between the ideologues, the secularists, and the people who have been generally apathetic? People don't yet know that at the end of an election, it can be fair even if you've lost. And even if you've lost, and even if you've won, it does not mean that you're more equal than those who have lost. So that's really the greatest challenge, how to move this from two different sides to being competing parties on the same side, which is the national countryside. That's really the challenge that I think we're facing. Thank you.
I think you'll all agree with me that we've all been truly privileged. You all know that the whole world will be watching events in the Middle East, and especially in Egypt, in the coming months and years. And as you sort of wonder what's happening, just remember what Nabil said to you today, and then you'll understand what's happening then. And for the most importantly, I must say, I do not know whether you intended to convey it, but I must say I leave this session now feeling more optimistic, because you somehow make it very clear that you can actually overcome these challenges.
Okay, sure. If without taking too much more of your time, I'm not saying this as a diplomat. I am not a diplomat any longer. I'm an academic, but I'm passionate about the future of Egypt, and I actually do believe we will succeed. I will not. I have, even in diplomacy, I am known never to lie. If I can't tell you the whole truth, I may not say the whole truth, but I'm not going to make stuff up because it'll come back and hit me in the face later on. We may pay a higher price for our mistakes, but I truly believe Egyptians have crossed over to a determination to participate, and if we do, we will succeed. Thank you very much.
But that's what you conveyed to us, your confidence. So thank you very much. Please join me.